My friends, mis amigos, mes amis, welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We crunch numbers about them. We theorycraft about them. Not because I want to tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential option for building and playing a character, with the hopes of creating something that is both really fun to play, but also powerful. So, if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas or suggestions on a character that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am really, really glad that you're here, so thank you for being here. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host. Really quick, if you would like a step-by-step written cheat sheet guide so that you can more easily recreate this character and all of the characters that I do on my channel, then I'd love it if you'd consider joining as a member of the channel. There's a little button down there that you can click on. For $2 a month, you get that little write-up cheat sheet that I create for each build, so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the video again or take notes or anything. And also, it's just a nice way to support the channel and help me create more and better content. So huge thanks to my channel members. Love you guys. But also huge thanks to everyone else who's not a channel member because they don't want to be or they don't think they can afford it. Love you too. Thanks for being here anyway. Just liking and subscribing and commenting. These are all also fantastic ways to support the channel. So thank you. Right. Here is what I love about D&D item number 538. No priests. No pure healer class. Before you get upset, let me ask this. How many of you have come to Dungeons & Dragons after having played an online role-playing game like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or something like that, where there is sort of a holy trinity of the role-playing party that everyone must subscribe to, right? You're either a tank, you're a healer, or you're damage. And everyone's pigeonholed into those roles. And if you are the tank, you just made yourself really, really hard to kill, and that's basically it. Or if you were the healer, you donned your priestly robes and just sat back out of the way of damage and just kind of spammed heal spells over and over and over again. If you were used to playing one of those roles in one of those kinds of games, you might have found yourself a little surprised coming into D&D and realizing that there wasn't really a true dedicated healer class in Dungeons & Dragons that just sat there and spammed heal spells over and over again, right? And not only that, but in fact, healing in Dungeons & Dragons doesn't really work that way, generally speaking. You might have said to yourself, I want to play a healer, so I guess that means I go cleric, so I can just sit back and heal. If so, you probably would have been surprised to find that, unlike what you may have previously experienced in video games, this healer wears scale mail or maybe even plate mail armor, often carries a shield, probably takes a weapon with them into battle, and maybe, heaven forbid, pun intended, uses it once in a while. Clerics in D&D can and arguably should sometimes be frontline characters. Healing and buffing their allies, yes, but also sometimes smashing skulls with a warhammer or calling down the wrath of their deity to obliterate their unholy foes. And I love that. I mean, some people might even argue that clerics aren't the best healers in D&D. I don't know who would say something like that. And I guess that brings me to this point. I don't mean to say that you couldn't build a pure healer character in D&D 5th edition. I myself have attempted to do so a couple of times, maybe most successfully there. And I also don't want to invalidate you if you really enjoy that playstyle. At the end of the day, we should all play what we truly love and what's fun for us, right? I don't think it's necessarily very easy to create a character like that in D&D 5e, but I think it can be done. That said, I think that most of us who have played in those holy trinity role-playing games where you've got the tank, the healer, and the damage would probably agree that, generally speaking, the pure healer role can kind of be a little boring. I mean, That's why it was always so hard to find a healer for your group when you wanted to run a dungeon or a raid or something, right? And for that reason, to avoid getting bored, longtime viewers of my channel know that my favorite way to build support characters are to make them good at healing and other support features, sure, but also give them something else really cool and fun and powerful to do, like burst damage or area of effect damage, etc., etc. But what I don't think I've done to date, at least not very well or not intentionally, is to create a character who can be both a healer and a tank. And of course, for the uninitiated, by tank we mean someone who protects their allies by trying to draw the fire of their enemies and is therefore very durable and can take a punch, right? The recent Moon Guardian might have been kind of a healer tank, but since you can't cast spells while wild shaped, I don't know that they would have qualified really. But clerics, man, if there is a character class in Dungeons and Dragons, both a tank and like a support character that can heal really well, it's gotta be clerics, right? You can potentially get access to the best armor in game. You arguably have the best, or at least one of the best spell lists for healing and buffing your allies. But also, unlike the paladin, who I'd maybe consider to be like runner-up for the I want to tank and heal role, clerics are full casters, meaning they have more spell slots and better and faster spell progression for more and better heals and cures and buffs, right? I know, aura of protection, but still. So that is what we're going to be doing with our character build today. We're going to create a cleric who, simply by being a cleric, will be a really strong healer and buffer for their party, but who will otherwise be putting all of their focus and energy into filling the role of a tank for their party, making them like the ultimate protector, as they'll not only be protecting their allies by interposing themselves between the enemy and their friends, but they will be buffing, curing, healing, and even bringing back from death those friends who do manage to get themselves hurt despite our character's best efforts. One quick note, we're going to be doing a fair bit of multi-classing here as usual for me, and rather than like try to explain a reason story-wise for why we take some of class X here and class Y there, I think I'd want to discuss with my DM beforehand and just tell them that I envision this character as being like sort of their own custom class, like I've done with several builds in the past. We'd call it something like the Divine Bulwark or the Metallic Protector, something that, as part of their natural class progression, just happens to take some levels in class X, some in class Y, and some in class Z. Obviously, you don't have to do this, or your DM might not even like the idea and could demand that you come up with a story reason for diverging from your starting class when you do so. If so, you should absolutely do that, and I'd love to hear the story that you would come up with for the multi-classing that we're going to do. We are simply calling this episode 110, The Divine Protector. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton, who created this amazing artwork for the character concept that I sent him. He does this every week. He's a fantastic artist, as most of you know. And if you're interested in following him, or perhaps reaching out to him to see if you can commission him to create some art for you and or your party, I will, as always, put links in the video description on how to do so. Thanks, Randall. Before we jump into the build, I am really excited, you guys, to tell you about a new sponsor that I have this week, a super fantastic company called Minis Monthly. If you guys love using physical representations at your table for your characters, your NPCs, and even terrain as much as I do, and I really love that aspect of this game, then you are going to freaking love Minis Monthly. They are a 3D printing company that specializes in creating super high quality minis for your TTRPG. They have a massive catalog of existing minis filled with tons of monsters, terrain, and other characters that you can peruse in order to get the models you need for your game. Not only that, but if you can't find what you're looking for, you can even connect with their creative team to help custom design the exact mini that you need printed. Now, to check out that portion of what they do, just head over to minis-monthly.com. I will put that link in the video description, of course. Better yet, if you decide to order anything at checkout, just use the promo code D4DeepDive and you'll save 10% on your order. You're welcome. But my favorite part about what they do is their subscription service. See, every month they pick a theme like ancient woodlands or depths of hell or deep sea tales. And if you subscribe, you'll get a box every single month filled with fantastic minis, all crafted to match the theme of that month. The best part is there are multiple subscription levels, so you can subscribe at whatever level your budget will allow, and then just sit back and enjoy getting a surprise of high quality themed minis in the mail every single month. It's like Christmas year round. Now, for the month of October, the theme is the Forgotten Maze, which is perfect for Halloween as these minis will all be specter and horror themed. I mean, check out these screenshots. These are freaking amazing. These are really fantastic minis that they're creating, right? So if you want to become a subscriber, just head over to their Patreon site. It's patreon.com/minismonthly. Again, I'll put that in the video description as well. These guys recently sent us a box of minis to play with in our Tales of Veneria campaign. And I gotta tell you guys, the quality is fan-freaking-tastic. You should absolutely check them out and give them your support. I know you won't be disappointed. So huge thanks to Minis Monthly. You guys are gonna do great things, I know it. And let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1, for our starting class, we are not starting Cleric, we're going Artificer. I know that's going to be annoying for some of you because I promise a Cleric Tank and then we start Artificer. But as most of you probably know by now, I love to preach for a tank character or a protector character, right? The importance of having a reliable way to encourage your enemies to attack you instead of your friends. We call features that do that taunts, or maybe more appropriately for D&D anyway, soft taunts. And clerics don't really get a very reliable, innate way to let us apply a soft taunt every turn. And for that reason, I think it's really important that we need to start with a class and subclass that can get us that soft taunt. And of all the options that are available to us in D&D 5th edition for that mechanic, I think the Artificer makes the most sense for this character, for a number of reasons. Our spell slot progression won't be as slowed down if we go this route, and also I think it makes a lot of sense for this character thematically. See, our character is of the earth. They are particularly fascinated by the various metals you might extract from the earth, and they love to work with, shape, and perfect those metals. They seem to have a special interest and talent for crafting those metals, often with the aid of arcane and or divine assistance. They craft them into things that can protect, defend, and support those in need. So yes, we're starting our journey as an Artificer. And as for our race, this was actually a bit of a tough call for me. There are so many more great options to consider for our race when our primary focus is on our own survivability than there used to be. I still think Custom Lineage and Variant Human are worth considering, as there are a couple of feats that I'd really like to get on this character, and starting with a free feat is always nice. But on the other hand, Hill Dwarf would be worth considering, as they get a little more HP than other characters. Plus a Dwarf Cleric Tank just kind of feels right to me for this character. That said, both Shifter and Warforged could get us a +1 to our armor class. That would also be awesome. But as we will see, I think armor class is going to be the least of our concerns on this character. And ever since Monsters of the Multiverse, Mom, I kind of feel like the new gold standard for non-barbarian, non-bladesinger tank character builds is the Earth Genasi. So that is what I'm going to take here. Feel free to go with one of the others that I've mentioned or something else that you like just because you want to. But I think both mechanically and thematically, the Earth Genasi works really, really well for the classes and the subclasses that we're going to be taking. Thematically, because we're going to be very interested in working with metal drawn from the earth, like I've mentioned, and that's something that Earth Genasi are sort of very attuned to inherently. But mechanically, the biggest draw is the Merge with Stone feature that Earth Genasi get. This tells us that you know the Blade Ward cantrip and can cast it not as an action like normal, but as a bonus action, proficiency bonus times per day. As a reminder, Blade Ward gives us resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapon attacks for an entire round. And, as a reminder, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapon attacks is going to be most of the damage that most PCs at most D&D 5e tables are going to be subjected to. And resistance to damage is just so good. especially for a character who's primarily concerned about being hard to kill. Merge with Stone also gives us the Pass Without Trace spell once we hit 5th level, and that's a really strong spell, giving you and your allies a +10 to stealth checks for an hour. You get to cast it once per day for free, and thereafter with the use of spell slots. Really, really nice. As for our ability scores, I'm going to assume we're going the point buy method as always, and would recommend taking a 15 Constitution and a +1 there from our racial, a 15 Intelligence and a +1 there, and a 15 Wisdom and a +1 there. If we were to do that, it would mean that we're dumping Dexterity along with Strength and Charisma. And dumping Dexterity is particularly painful for our dexterity saving throws, not to mention our initiative, but we will get a way to deal with those pesky fireball spells and the like, as we'll discuss in a minute. And the other 3 stats, Con, Int, and Wiz, just felt a lot more important to me for this build. I love being able to start out with 3 16s. Feel free to lower probably your Wisdom score a little bit if you want to bring that dexterity up a smidge, but we do need to have Wisdom at least a 13 for cleric levels, right? And having a kind of a low to middling Wisdom score would make us a worse cleric in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think I'd stick with 16 and dump the rest. As for our starting equipment, I'll recommend, as I often do, going with the gold buy method and then picking up some scale mail, a shield, and any other necessities you might have. I'm just planning on using cantrips and other spells for the first couple of levels since we have such a terrible strength and dexterity score, so I don't really think a weapon is necessary personally. Might as well save that money. But then as an artificer at level 1, we get magical tinkering. It's a nice little utility feature, allowing us to turn a non-magical tiny object into something that emits like a sound or a visual effect or a light or even a recorded message. Cool. And then of course we get spells. For cantrips, I would go with Thorn Whip, as it's a nice like 30-foot range spell that lets you drag enemies 10 feet closer to you if you hit them, as well as do a little damage. And that's always a nice little way to try and keep your allies safe as you pull enemies towards you and away from them. I also like Ray of Frost here, as it does almost as much damage as Firebolt. It's a D8 instead of a D10, but then it reduces the move speed of an enemy you hit by 10 feet. And that just might be the difference between a bad guy getting up in the grill of your sorcerer ally, right, and not. I think it's worth taking a teeny bit less damage. As for first level spells, there are plenty of good ones to consider. Absorb Elements is a must-have, I think, as it lets us use our reaction to get resistance to elemental damage. So fire, acid, cold, lightning, and thunder damage. And yeah, that's going to be especially important for our low dex save selves. I'd also grab Cure Wounds here for a nice little early level heal. And then probably Fairy Fire for our concentration for now, since Fairy Fire gives you and your allies advantage on attacks against enemies who fail their save against Fairy Fire when you cast it. Giving all of your party members advantage on attacks against the enemy is a really great buff. At level 2, we get Infuse Item. And Infuse Item is probably my favorite Artificer feature. It lets you take a non-magical item and infuse it to make it magical and give it a nice little buff, and there's a ton of really fun and cool infusions that we get to choose from. Right now we can learn 4 infusions, but can only have 2 active at any one time. Also, we can't repeat any one infusion on multiple items, and we can't infuse the same item with multiple infusions. Now, here's the thing that I feel like I need to say about infusions. I have mentioned this in the past with other Artificer builds, but I think it's going to be especially relevant for this character and so bears repeating. Unless there is a feature inherent in a class or a subclass that allows for it, I never assume that any of my character builds have magic items, since I have no way of knowing if your DM at your table is going to make use of magic items, nor how often, nor if they'll just kind of let you pick the magic items that you want or buy them or craft them, or if it's always just going to be a crapshoot. By contrast, infusions are great in that it gives us a known magical item, and as such, when I crunch numbers, it makes the character look really cool and powerful compared to their non-magic item using counterparts, right? Of course, the reality is magic items do exist in D&D, and you are pretty likely to end up with some at some point in your campaign that might be as good as or even better than the infusions we're going to be using here. So the increased power that they purportedly give when we crunch numbers and put it in a spreadsheet might not be as dramatic as it actually might be in game, right? For example, I'm going to tell you right now to grab the enhanced defense infusion, stick it on your shield, and now you have a +1 to your AC with your shield. That's great. But also, infusions don't work on magic items, and +1 shields exist in game, and they're not even all that rare. The great news, of course, is that if you can get a +1 shield, you can always take a different infusion, like Mind Sharpener, and now you're really good at making your concentration checks. So you still get some power from infusions. On the other hand, it might let you take a different magic item if your DM is pretty lenient and lets you choose things. You know, you've already got a +1 shield, so look to get some other cool magic item instead. So you're still going to be better off than you would have been without infusions, right? I just wanted to acknowledge this as it's something that we're going to be dealing with again later on in this character's build. Anyway, in addition to enhanced defense, I think I would use either Mind Sharpener or Enhanced Arcane Focus for now at this level, and Enhanced Arcane Focus gives us a bonus to hit with our spell attack rolls. I would also, for a 4th infusion, make sure to grab Enhanced Weapon too, although we're not going to be using it until next level. But yes, at level 3, we would get first up the right tool for the job that lets us magically create a set of artisan tools. I really hope this comes in handy for you sometime in your campaign. And then we get our Artificer subclass, our Artificer Specialist. And we, as many of you have probably guessed by now, are going with Armorer. I really do think this is a great fit thematically, like I've said, but yes, Armorer gets a lot of fantastic features. They're easily my favorite Artificer subclass. You are an expert forger of metal now, crafting a suit of armor that functions like a second skin for you as you bond with it to enhance its capabilities. So as an armorer, first up, and importantly, we get proficiency with heavy armor now. So go ahead and grab the best stuff you can afford. We can ignore any strength requirements that heavy armor might have, which is fantastic since we dumped strength. And that armor can now function as an arcane focus for our artificer spells. In addition, we can don or doff it as an action, and it cannot be removed from us against our will. Also, as an armorer, we get to choose between the Infiltrator model and the Guardian model for our armor, which is really, really cool. I do love the Infiltrator model. I've done a couple of builds for them in the past, most recently the Thunderball, which was a lot of fun. But of course, for this character, I'm going to assume that we'll be hanging out in the Guardian model pretty much all of the time, though you can switch it up with a short or long rest if you ever need to do some infiltrating. And I do love that versatility. The Guardian model, however, gets 2 really great features. First, and most importantly for us, is the Thunder Gauntlets feature, which tells us that so long as we are not holding anything in them, each of the armor's gauntlets counts as a simple melee weapon that we are proficient with. It does 1d8 damage on a hit, and most importantly, any enemy you hit with it has disadvantage on attacks they make against anyone other than you until your next turn, and thus we have our soft taunt, something that reliably and consistently discourages enemies from attacking our allies and encourages them then to attack us instead, like all good tanks should be doing. Without a feature like this, you're not a tank. You're just hard to kill. Not the same thing. Capiche? Now, don't forget, attacks that we make with the Thunder Gauntlets can be made using our intelligence modifier instead of strength, both to hit and to damage. And this is the main reason why I wanted our intelligence to be so high, because if we can't hit our enemy, then we're not going to be taunting them. So it's really important for us. For that reason, I would, at this point, be sure to infuse your gauntlets with the enhanced weapon infusion so we can now have a +1 to hit and damage with the gauntlet. Now, some of you are going to argue that since the gauntlet is part of our armor, we can't infuse it in this way. I, and as far as I can tell, the vast majority of the community that plays D&D 5e would argue that since we're told the gauntlets can count as a weapon while we're not holding anything in them, we should be fine. But if you want to argue about it in the comments, I 100% welcome your arguments. Feed the algorithm beast, please. We do also get the defensive field feature here, which tells us that proficiency bonus times per day, we can, as a bonus action, give ourselves temporary hit points equal to our artificer level. So it's only 3 for now, but every little bit helps. As for the 4th level of our Divine Protector class, I'm going to do something that's going to annoy many of you. I'm taking a level in Wizard. I know, still no Cleric. Bait and switch, right? You, of course, don't have to do this. I have one main reason for wanting to dip Wizard here. I want the shield spell. It's just that good. Yes, Battlesmith Artificers get it, so we could have gone that route instead of Armorer, but the Steel Defender is just not nearly as good at being a tank as the Armorer is, in my opinion. Unless, of course, you ride them into battle and tank from their backs like this. So that means I either need to take a multi-class dip or give up one of my precious ability score increases or feats to get it via like the Magic Initiate feat, which even though this will be fixed in D&D 1, we're still using standard 5e rules right now, so we could only cast that spell once per day, and that's just not enough. When considering which class that has access to the shield spell to multi-class into here, I think the Wizard is the obvious choice, since they're intelligence based already anyway, meaning that we don't have to be any more mad multiple ability score dependent than we already are. So yes, I'm taking a Wizard dip here. And as such, that means we get Arcane Recovery, which will let us recover a spent 1st level spell slot with a short rest once per day. And that's pretty nice. Another casting of shield, among other things. And then, yeah, we get spells. And so that means we get access to some important things that Artificers and Clerics don't. Most importantly, like I've said, the shield spell, which lets us use our reaction when we're hit by an attack to increase our armor class by 5, potentially causing that attack to miss, and it stays at that additional 5 AC higher until our next turn. And I think it might be a little bit overpowered, and I kind of feel like Wizards of the Coast should maybe nerf it somehow, like prohibit it from being used if you're wearing any kind of armor other than mage armor, something like that. I don't know. But since they haven't done that, we're going to use this spell, and we're really happy about how strong it is. I'm not going to argue with you about whether or not we need Warcaster to cast this spell if we're using a shield. I'm confident that we don't need to so long as our gauntleted hand is otherwise empty, but once again, feel free to argue in the comments about it. The other really great reason to go Wizard here is that we can also get the Find Familiar spell. And yes, that means that we will have a really great Scouting Familiar who can also take the help action and thereby grant us advantage on our very important gauntlet attack, further ensuring that we land that all-important soft taunt of ours. Finally, as far as cantrips, I'd be sure to pick up Booming Blade here if you didn't do so as an Artificer. Booming Blade is super nice in that not only does it do some additional damage when we land our attack with it, starting next level at least at level 5, but it also sheathes an enemy in booming energy that will do even more damage to them if they move before our next turn. And that's just one more way to ensure that the enemy stays where they should, next to us, instead of chasing after our squishier allies, right? And yeah, for those who might want to argue that you can't cast Booming Blade with our action using the Thunder Gauntlet as a weapon, since the spell requires a material component of a weapon worth at least 1 silver piece, and the Thunder Gauntlets are armor, not a weapon, I would refer you to my earlier comments, and once again invite you to argue in the comments about it. Sorry if I'm coming across as like flippant or snide here. I really don't mean to be. I do think about these things. I put a fair amount of research into them, honestly. If things don't work the way that I'm saying they should at your table, that's totally cool, and I really don't want to pick a fight with you or your DM. I'm just trying to go by what the vast majority of the D&D community seems to rule for these kinds of things, where Jeremy Crawford hasn't necessarily weighed in on it himself. Anyway, at level 5, we're going to take some Cleric levels, finally. And yeah, you could have gone Cleric sooner if you really wanted, but to me it made the most sense to get our Armorer foundation in place first, so that we had that taunt, right? And a little Wizard dip for the shield spell and our Familiar before committing to Cleric. So here we are. And as a Cleric 1, first up, we get our Cleric subclass, our Divine Domain, and we are going, can you guess? You already know, don't you? That's right. We're going with the Forge domain. Woohoo! First time ever going Forge, finally! I am super excited about it, actually. I think it's a 100% a perfect fit for the concept that we've been building thus far. And I love the mechanics that we get as a Forge Cleric as well, so let's read what WotC has to say about Forge Clerics. The gods of the forge are patrons of artisans who work with metal, from a humble blacksmith who keeps a village in horseshoes and plow blades, to the mighty elf artisan whose diamond-tipped arrows of mithril have felled demon lords. The gods of the forge teach that, with patience and hard work, even the most intractable metal can be transformed from a lump of ore to a beautifully wrought object. Clerics of these deities search for objects lost to the forces of darkness, liberate mines overrun by orcs, and uncover rare and wondrous materials necessary to create potent magic items. Followers of these gods take great pride in their work, and they are willing to craft and use heavy armor and powerful weapons to protect them. Yeah, I kinda do wish we could have been a dwarf here. But Earth Genasi work really well too, right? Right. So, right at level 1, as a Forge Cleric, we get a fantastic feature, Blessing of the Forge, which tells us that we can imbue one non-magical weapon or armor at the end of a long rest. If we choose armor, which we will, it can give it a +1 to armor class. And yes, just like with Artificer Infusions, this is amazing in a world without magic items, and maybe slightly less so otherwise. That said, magic armor is a little harder to come by. You know, a +1 armor is always rare quality, right? I will say this though, I kinda hate that this feature and Artificer Infusions too, for that matter, don't work on things that are already magical. It severely limits their power. It makes them really great at low level and in low magic item campaigns, and way less valuable otherwise. Here's hoping that you can convince your DM to let you apply the bonus to an item regardless of whether it's magical or not. But they might consider that to be overpowered, and they might be right. I mean, maybe at least see if they'll let you add a bonus to a magic item at like higher character level or something. Anyway, we also get spells, of course, at Cleric 1 here, and there are lots of really great ones to choose from. As Forge Clerics, we do get Identify and Searing Smite for free. Identify brings some really nice utility, and it isn't typically available to Clerics, so that's cool. Searing Smite is kind of like a Paladin Smite. The spell's only available to Paladins too, typically, but it costs our concentration and a bonus action, so I don't actually imagine using it all that often on this character. As for the other spells that we should get, I'm going to recommend grabbing Guidance, always a great cantrip for utility, and even in combat sometimes. Healing Word for a really great bring your allies back from unconscious as a bonus action from range heal option. I'd probably pick up Command, I think, as it can be a nice control/protection option to use on enemies that are far away from you, that are beating up your friends, as you tell that enemy to grovel or better yet flee. Bless kind of feels like a must-have since it's really one of the best party buffs in game, letting multiple party members add a d4 to their attacks and saving throws. But I think for number crunching purposes anyway, I'm going to assume that we're concentrating on Shield of Faith. You truly might be better off with Bless. Your party almost assuredly will. But I am a mindless slave to the spreadsheet, and Shield of Faith would let me bump my armor class by 2, and I just can't help myself. Of course, use something else if you feel so inclined. But yeah, I just really love to explore the limits of what's possible when crunching numbers, so I'm going to assume we're using Shield of Faith in the interest of seeing just how far we can push our survivability here. At level 6, we would be a Cleric 2, and all Clerics at Cleric 2 get Channel Divinity. They can use it once per short rest for 3 things. Turn Undead, which lets us force all undead within 30 feet of us to make a Wisdom saving throw or spend 1 minute running away from us. Harness Divine Power, which lets us recover a spent spell slot equal to half our proficiency bonus rounded up at the end of a short rest. Remember, we can only do this once per day, or per long rest anyway, for now. And then Forge Clerics can use Channel Divinity in a way that's unique to them, called Artisan's Blessing. This feature is cool, kind of weird, but potentially really useful. With Artisan's Blessing, you perform a 1-hour ritual involving metal, and at the end of the ritual, the metal sort of just magically coalesces into a thing you've created that itself must contain at least some metal. Unfortunately, the thing you create can't be magical and can't be worth more than 100 gold pieces, so no crafting yourself suits of plate armor here, alas. But I mean, it could be like a lockbox or a metal gate to block a passage. or even a key if you have an original copy of the key anyway, so, no just bypassing locked doors this way, alas. I don't know, I'm sure there are a lot of really fun, cool, and creative ways to make use of this channel divinity, and I would actually really love to hear the coolest thing that a Forge Cleric at your table did with Artisan's Blessing. Please let me know. I'm sure there's some great stories out there. But at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. And for those new to the channel, this is how we calculate damage numbers against our tank builds.
For everybody else, feel free to just skip ahead 30 seconds.
Right. We pit our tanks against 3 hypothetical combat encounters of medium difficulty for a party of 4 at this level. One is a boss fight against a dragon. One is a typical fight against 4 or 5 normal-ish enemies that you might fight at this level. And the third is just a level appropriate fireball. We figure out how much damage our tank would take if they had access to all of their resources. So a spell slot to cast shield if need be, a use of your bonus action blade ward, etc. That number is our damage taken per round, or DTPR. We then determine how long our tank would survive if they took that exact amount of damage every single round, which gives us our RTD, or rounds to die. It's flawed. You won't necessarily have access to the shield spell every single round, but at the same time, you're not going to need the shield spell every single round, because you're often not going to even get hit without using the shield spell, right? And in the real world, the imaginary real world, every enemy on the battlefield isn't going to spend their entire turn attacking you and only you round after round after round. I mean, that would be awesome if they did, but it's pretty unlikely. So yeah, the model's imperfect but serviceable, so long as we apply it to every single tank character we build, which I have. Right now, with a casting of the shield spell and the Shield of Faith going, assuming that we have plate armor, which at level 6 we might not have yet, but with our Blessing of the Forge +1 armor class on it, and our enhanced defense infusion +1 to AC on our shield, we have a potential armor class of 29 at level 6. That's higher than any character that I've ever made before at this level. And I mean, we could have even gotten it to 30 if we were a Warforged or a Shifter, right? That's ridiculous. As for our hit points, if we have temporary hit points from our defensive field up, and I'm only going to assume 1 application of it when the fight starts since I want our bonus action available for Merge with Stone, our current maximum hit points is a fairly low 53. Not bad for a caster, but not great for a tank. However, thanks to our Earth Genasi Merge with Stone feature, we can bonus action Blade Ward, giving us resistance to incoming bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage until our next turn. I know we can only use it 3 times a day currently as a bonus action, so yes, we are, as always, looking at best case scenario numbers here, yeah? And so, against our boss fight here, which was a young white dragon, we would on average take 2 damage per round. And at that rate of damage, we'd survive for 30 rounds. The typical fight here was against 4 berserkers, and the DTPR there, it was also 2, but it's I'm rounding here, so the rounds to die is 33. And against a level 3 DC 14 fireball, we would take 12 damage on average, and at that rate, we'd survive for 5 rounds. And yeah, that puts us at the top, or nearly at the top, compared to other tier 1 tank builds that I have done to date at this level. And if you want to see the breakdown that I recently did where I ranked those tank builds, check here. As for the fireball, we are more middle of the pack by comparison there, and that is going to be a continuing theme for this character with our really low dexterity save. But yeah, we are pretty tough to kill. In fact, neither the dragon nor the berserkers would be hitting us unless they crit, assuming we have the shield spell available anyway. So I would almost assuredly be concentrating on Bless, not Shield of Faith at this level, depending on what you're typically fighting. But you know, it's fun to hypothesize, right? Let's see where we can take it from here. At level 7, we would be a Cleric 3, and we get 2nd level spells. So many fantastic options here for support purposes especially. Lesser Restoration cures all kinds of nasty conditions. Prayer of Healing is a not terrible out of combat heal for the group. It's fairly efficient anyway if you have multiple party members that are damaged. I love Warding Bond to death. It lets you raise an ally's armor class by 1 and gives them resistance to all damage they take. though you then in turn take the same amount of damage as they do. But I mean, if you can't taunt the entire battlefield, or if your DM is kind of metagaming you and having your enemies largely ignore you to try and attack everyone else instead, at the very least you could throw up Warding Bond on your squishiest teammate, right? And it's kind of a foolproof way to let you absorb that incoming damage that your ally would otherwise be taking and still kind of fill that protector role. Of course, in that case, hit points are going to be a lot more important for you than armor class. Best of all, Warding Bond doesn't require concentration and lasts for an hour, so yeah, it's a fantastic tanking spell. The only one I'm going to be applying when we crunch numbers from here on out is Aid. Aid raises the maximum hit point total of you and 2 other allies by 5. It heals you for that much as well, and it scales really nicely, increasing by 5 more hit points for every level that you upcast it. So yeah, it's great for us, it's great for our friends, perfect for our healer/tank. At level 8, we would be a Cleric 4, and we get our first ability score increase or feat, finally. And I'm going to take Tough here because it gives us 2 more hit points per character level, and that's really hard to beat for a character who's primarily trying to bolster their own survivability. It's just hard to argue with more hit points, so Tough it is. Also, of course, if I were actually playing this character in-game, there's a very high likelihood that I might just say, yeah, I'm tough enough to kill. I want more intelligence so I can do a little more damage and more reliably land my soft taunt attack coupled with Booming Blade, right? Not to mention improve my artificer spells, right? But slave to the spreadsheet that we are, I'm taking Tough here to increase survivability. At level 9, we would be a Cleric 5, and we get Destroy Undead first up, and this just tells us that when we use Turn Undead against undead creatures of challenge rating 1/2 or lower, if they fail their save, they're simply destroyed instead of turned. That's cool. And then we get 3rd level spells. And yeah, once again, some seriously awesome support spell options here. Beacon of Hope gives advantage on wisdom saves to our entire party and heals them for the maximum amount of any healing that they take. Too bad it requires our concentration. But speaking of, Aura of Vitality is a fantastic and very efficient heal, especially I think useful outside of combat. It lets you heal 70 hit points of damage on average, distributed amongst whichever party members you want over an entire minute. Life Transference is another one of those, well, if my DM's going to ignore me as a tank, at least I can expend some of my own life force to give my allies a super efficient big heal that we made really great use of in the Martyr character, but I ran out of cards a long time ago. Revivify feels like a must-have to me to bring back friends from the dead. Meld into Stone is really on point thematically for this character, if nothing else. Dispel Magic is always handy. And I'd even consider using Spirit Guardians. I mean, maybe doing damage to all enemies within 15 feet of you every single round will convince your DM to attack you if they're not doing so otherwise. But the only one that I'm going to assume that we're using going forward when I crunch numbers is Motivational Speech, which lets you give 5 temporary hit points and advantage on wisdom saves to your entire party for an hour if you take 1 minute to cast it before going into battle, and no concentration required. It's only a teeny bit more temporary hit points than we were getting from Defensive Aura, but if you upcast it, it goes up by 5 for every spell level, and yeah, every little bit helps. Plus your party will benefit from it as well. Alright, at level 9, time for our next damage report. Since last we checked, thanks to Tough, Motivational Speech, and Aid, we have a potential maximum hit point total here of 117, assuming we cast both Motivational Speech and Aid at the 4th level, which we can do thanks to how multiclassing works for spellcasters, right? We have the spell slots of like an 8th level full caster, and yeah, that means 2 4th level spell slots. Our armor class hasn't changed since last check, holding steady at 29, assuming we're using the shield spell. And so, against our boss fight here, which was a young blue dragon, we would on average take 2 damage per round again, and at that rate we would survive for 65 rounds. The typical fight was against 4 hobgoblin captains, and they would on average do 4 damage per round to us, making our RTD 29. And then against a level 5 DC 15 fireball, our DTPR would be 15 and our RTD would be 8. And similarly, we are kind of top of the class for tier 1, or nearly so, for attacks against our armor class, and middling for that fireball. And we're feeling pretty smug about it, because hey, If no one else can, we can heal ourselves and our allies back to health after the fight is over, even bringing back friends from the dead, assuming any of us even took damage in the first place. At level 10, we would be a Cleric 6, and that means that we can now use Channel Divinity twice per rest. That's going to be really great for scaring off undead, making stuff out of metal, or even recovering spent spell slots. And we can use Harness Divine Power twice per day now, so that's nice. But even better, as a Forge Cleric, we get Soul of the Forge, which tells us that now we just straight up have resistance to fire damage, no need to worry any longer as to whether or not we have the spell slot and the reaction to cast Absorb Elements when that fireball comes our way. And also, wonderfully, we get a +1 to our armor class while wearing heavy armor, regardless of whether it's magical or not, and that is fantastic. At level 11, we would be a Cleric 7, and we get 4th level spells. As always, fantastic support and healing focused options here. Aura of Life gives all allies within 30 feet of us resistance to necrotic damage and keeps them from having their maximum hit points reduced, and they regain 1 hit point on their turn if they're unconscious. And yeah, 1 hit point, not a lot, but this is a fantastic way to just constantly bounce allies back up from unconscious without having to spend any additional resources on your part. Best of all, it happens on their turn, which means they can immediately make attacks or down a healing potion or run away. It's worth considering using, I think, even though it requires concentration. Aura of Purity similarly works on allies within 30 feet, also requires concentration, but then it gives immunity to disease, resistance to poison damage, and advantage on saves against blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, paralyzed, poisoned, or stunned. That's pretty awesome in very specific fights, right? Not a bad tool to keep in your tool belt. Of all 4th level spells, I think the most important to grab is probably Death Ward. It lasts for 8 hours, doesn't require concentration, and then when a person that you cast it on would drop to 0 hit points, they instead just drop to 1. This is going to bum you out if they're fighting an enemy with multi-attack and the first attack would have dropped them to 0, but instead only drops them to 1, and then the second attack knocks them unconscious anyway, but it's still pretty potent and could even be used to keep you from dying even if you fell from 30,000 feet, right? And that is awesome. And I want to know if anybody's done that in game. Who needs a parachute? I've got Death Ward. At level 12, we would be a Cleric 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. I really want to bump my Constitution. I probably should bump my Intelligence. But instead, I'm going to take the Heavy Armor Master feat because it makes me giggle. With Heavy Armor Master, first of all, it's a half feat, and it bumps our Strength by 1, so it might have been worth considering taking a slightly lower Wisdom score to get our Strength to even a 9. So that at least we can bump it here and get it to 10. But then, more importantly for us, while you are wearing heavy armor, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage that you take from non-magical attacks is reduced by 3. And most enemies in D&D are not making bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage with magical attacks, so that's going to help us out most of the time. And, 3 isn't a ton, but on those fights where you're rarely getting hit anyway, but you could potentially be dying from death by 1,000 cuts, it's really going to go a long way to improving our survivability, especially if we have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage thanks to Blade Ward, right? You reduce it by 3 and then cut it in half. We also, at Cleric 8, get Blessed Strikes. I mean, we could take Divine Strikes. Since Tasha's, all clerics get to choose between Blessed Strikes, which gives an extra 1d8 of damage on either our cantrips or our weapon attacks. Or we could take the subclass specific version of that. In the Forge Cleric's case, that's Divine Strike. Divine Strike does an extra 1d8 of fire damage on a weapon attack only. Now the benefit, of course, of Divine Strike is that it does scale to 2d8 once you hit Cleric 14. But since we're not going to get to Cleric 14 on this build anyway, I'm just going to take Blessed Strikes since it gives us the benefit of working on either a cantrip or a weapon attack, just in case. And also it does radiant damage, which tends to be less often resisted than fire damage. Also, finally, Destroy Undead now works on undead creatures of challenge rating 1 or lower. At level 13, I think here I'd actually probably jump back to Artificer for just a second to grab that ability score increase or feat that's just hanging there waiting for us to take it. I really want to bump my Constitution finally, which I haven't done yet for our entire career, taking it then to an 18 with the same understanding, of course, that you really might be better off bumping not your survivability, but your intelligence, or maybe even your wisdom to benefit your heals, among other things. Or and heck, even taking resilient dexterity here if you are super concerned about those dexterity saves that you seem to constantly be failing. I'm going to go Constitution because it looks best on the spreadsheet. You do you. And that's just in time for our level 13 damage report, naturally. Since last check, we've had some nice additional increases to our survivability via Soul of the Forge, Heavy Armor Master, and a higher Constitution score. We've also picked up some nice bumps to our damage, and our support, and our utility. So yeah, it's been a really great few levels for us. Our current hit point potential is a whopping 185 if we upcast Aid with our single 6th level spell slot, and Motivational Speech with a 5th level spell slot. Our armor class has reached that promised land of 30 AC so long as we have a spell slot and our reaction available for shield. And so, against our boss at this level, which was an adult white dragon, the DTPR would be, again, for the 3rd time in a row, 2. And the rounds to die would be 115. The typical fight was against 5 helmed horrors, and they would also do 2 damage on average, though it's rounded, so the rounds to die would be 82 in this case. And against a level 7 DC 16 fireball, we would take 19 damage per round on average, and at that rate, we would survive for 10 rounds. And at this level, compared to other tank builds, we are the unequivocal leader for attacks against our armor class. Assuming we have our resources available, of course, and yeah, still in the middle of the pack against that fireball. Dang, Cleric. At level 14, you might want to go Artificer 5 to pick up extra attack. That's available to armorers, and I wouldn't blame you for doing so. Obviously, our survivability is in a phenomenal place. It might even be too good, frankly. And there's no doubt a lot of value in going the extra attack route, so you can potentially hit and thus taunt 2 enemies per turn. Or if nothing else, have 2 chances to hit and taunt the one target you're after. But keep in mind that the damage itself, depending on your level, won't be much better or might even be worse than just casting Booming Blade. Our gauntlet is only doing a d8 plus 4 damage right now, 3 for our intelligence plus 1 for the enhanced weapon infusion. And Booming Blade has been doing an extra d8 since level 5. More now, we passed level 11 a while ago. Plus more damage again if they move. And that's a big part of the appeal for us, right? Plus, we're likely getting advantage on that one attack thanks to our familiar. With extra attack, we'd get advantage on the first attack, but not the second. So yeah, it's worth considering. If you're gonna go for extra attack, I would probably get it much, much earlier. Maybe even starting with 5 levels of Artificer before taking any Cleric levels. I really wanted this character to feel like a cleric primarily and as quickly as I could, so opted to skip extra attack here, and to that end I'm going to stick with cleric for the rest of the build personally. Meaning we'd be a cleric 9 here and we get 5th level spells. Some really great utility spells here like Legend Lore, Scrying, Commune, even a nice AoE area of effect blast spell in Flame Strike if you want to have that arrow in your quiver. But the ones I'd be sure to pick up for support and healing purposes would be Greater Restoration, which is often the only way to get rid of some really nasty, like campaign-specific statuses, and also Petrification, Exhaustion, reduction to a character's maximum hit points or ability scores. And then I'd also grab Raise Dead, I think. It's really nice to have if you can't get to your dead ally within 1 minute of their passing, and after that Revivify doesn't work. You know, maybe you were out of spell slots or you didn't have the necessary components at the time that they died. Raise Dead gives you a 10-day window to bring them back, although it does take your ally longer to recover from being resurrected with Raise Dead. Still, great to have when you really, really need it. At level 15, we would be a Cleric 10, and we get Divine Intervention. I love Divine Intervention conceptually. It just feels like it has a pretty limited actual use in game. Once per day, and with your action, you can implore your deity for aid, rolling a percentile die, and if you roll equal to or lower than your Cleric level, so that's a 10% chance right now, then your deity intervenes, and your DM decides what that looks like. If it works, something amazing is undoubtedly going to happen, and then you can't use that feature again for another 7 days, because your god can really only take so much of your whining. I love it when you guys share stories in the comments about when Divine Intervention was used to really cool, powerful effect at your table. If you haven't done so yet, please share with me now. They're always like really epic tales. At level 16, we would be a Cleric 11, and we get 6th level spells. Again, really great options for utility purposes here, especially Find the Path, Forbiddance, Word of Recall. But for support and healing purposes, I think I'm going to prioritize Heal. First of all, it just straight up heals for 70 hit points. And while Aura of Vitality will do the same on average, it takes a minute to get there. So this is really nice when you just need a massive heal in the middle of combat, right? It also cures blindness, deafness, and diseases and scales by a flat 10 HP for every level you upcast it. So it's a super efficient, effective, powerful heal. And then, of course, I'd be sure to grab Hero's Feast. It's one of the best buff spells in game. Gives your entire party a 24-hour buff that makes them immune to poison and to being frightened. Best pre-dragon fight meal ever. It lets your whole party make all wisdom saves with advantage and raises their maximum hit points by 2d10. I'm definitely going to assume that we have this buff active next time I crunch numbers, though of course I appreciate that the 1000 gold spell component that gets consumed when you cast it probably won't be available for every single fight, unless you're just in the habit of carrying lots and lots of gem-encrusted bowls with you everywhere you go, I suppose. Don't forget, our Destroy Undead now works on undead creatures of challenge rating 2 or lower. And finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Cleric 12, and that means we get another ability score increase or feat. And finally, we get our Constitution score capped at 20, though, as I've been saying, you very well may want to use this for something else. For our final damage report, then, we've again seen some nice bumps to our survivability in the form of a higher Constitution score and better maximum hit points thanks to Hero's Feast. We've also seen some great additional utility and support features thanks mostly to our better spells and Divine Intervention. Our total potential maximum hit points now on average will be 277 if we use our lone 8th level spell slot for Aid and a 7th level spell slot for Motivational Speech, and a 6th level spell slot for Hero's Feast. Our armor class is still a very happy 30. And so, against our boss fight here, which was an adult red dragon, we would on average take more than 2 damage per round. It's all the way up to 6. And at that rate, we would survive for 44 rounds. The typical fight was against 5 earth elementals, and the DTPR there was 4, and the RTD was 65. And then finally, against not a fireball, we're talking 9th level spells, so Meteor Swarm, we would take 97 damage per round on average, and at that rate, we'd survive for 3 rounds, keeping us once again near the top of tier 1 at this level for attacks against our armor class, and in the middle for that Meteor Swarm. That spell destroys us just like it destroys everybody else who doesn't have evasion. Shut up, monk and rogue tanks. And so, let's discuss final thoughts. The tier score for this tank build, if you take the rounds to die against every combat we calculate for at every damage report, would be a 41. And that means that yes, we now have a new tier 1 leader for tank survivability. Yikes. Now, admittedly, my little ranking system is incredibly oversimplified and not all that useful for determining how good a tank is at their job, if we're being honest. It's mostly just a way for me to easily and quickly separate my tanks into tiers so I can keep the spreadsheets a little easier to read and less crowded. That said, the durability this character brings to the table, especially versus attacks against their AC, is sort of like literally off the charts. I've had this character build on my to-do list for a long time, and I think had I known just how durable we could make them, I would have built them sooner. I mean, between the benefits to our armor class that we get from spells, infusions, and Forge Cleric features, not to mention plate armor, shield, the ability to pick up both heavy armor master and still get resistance to damage by being an Earth Genasi, makes this build just an absolute impregnable bunker of a character. And I said earlier, like maybe too durable, right? It's very possible that your DM will just ignore you consistently regardless of whether you've put your soft taunt on them or not, because they're going to be less likely to hit you with your 30 AC than they will attacking one of your allies, even with disadvantage, right? With their much lower AC. So that's something to think about. Discuss with your DM, discuss with your party. And yeah, maybe you don't want to shoot for that super high AC, especially if it's going to mean making your dungeon master start throwing all kinds of saving throws at you constantly over and over and just ignoring your godly AC, right? But of course, The best thing about this build, after all, is that you're a cleric. You're healing with the best of them. Bonus action bouncing your allies up from unconscious with healing word if need be, throwing out auras when the situation calls for it, buffing like no other, decimating hordes of undead, and even, when the situation calls for it, raining down fire from heaven with righteous wrath. Who wouldn't want to play what feels to me like the ultimate protector? I mean, you are practically unkillable. And then, thanks to what you're bringing to the table in the form of support features and spells and healing, your party practically is as well. So, that's the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a blast creating it. I hope that you know how much I love you, because I do. You're so awesome. Thank you for all that you do for the channel. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you'll check out the other content in the channel if you're not in the habit of doing so, but most importantly, I hope you have a really great day and a fantastic week, and that you stay safe, and that you be good and kind, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. I hear the drizzle of the rain, like a memory it falls, soft and warm continuing, tapping on my roof and walls. That's card number 3, right? Yes, okay. Fire, cold, acid, thunder, and poison? I don't know. Better look it up. And as I watch the drops of rain weave their weary path and I know that I am like the rain. There before the grace of you go I. It's a rainy day here, and I love it, because we need the rain. I love rain. And I love that song by Simon & Garfunkel. It's one of my favorites. Kathy's song. Check it out if you don't know it. Okay. Don't say once in a while. No, don't even say that. It's really nice to have. But since they haven't do that, the plane. I am totally out of cards. I ran out of cards a long time ago. Oh, we're going long today. Need to stay hydrated. Don't say that. So long as we have a spell slot once per day and with a bonus action? I thought it was with an action. Hold on a second. Yeah, your action. I was right. First I was wrong, and then I was right. At least I caught myself.